Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about books that I have recently finished reading. I usually wait until I have at least two books to talk about before I do a Fresh Red Kills episode, but in this case, we just got one book that I'll be talking about. And this is where I kind of have an informal, unscripted discussion about the book. I don't consider them official reviews at all. These are just, me basically just getting out my thoughts after reading something. And in this case, we have Robert Graves' I Claudius, originally published in 1934, which, I'd had to sit on my shelf for a long time, and I only knew a little bit about it. I decided to read it this month because one of my good booktube friends, Mark, over at Book Time with Elvis, he was doing a group read of this, and that wasn't the only group read that I ended up joining of his this month, but this was the last one. So I thought this would be a good time to actually dive into this while I had some other people to maybe bounce some ideas off of, and finally get it read. Now, going into this book, I knew that it was older. For some reason, I had it in my head that it was written maybe in the 1950s. And of course, I knew it was about Claudius, the emperor, and I knew that Claudius was somebody who was sort of physically lame, probably maybe underestimated during his lifetime. The early Roman emperors, I have a very, shallow understanding of. I haven't done a lot of in-depth reading into them. I've read, Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, but that was a while back. I've read some books on the Roman Empire, but I wouldn't say that extremely well versed in this era. I recognize a lot of the names, but I can't quite tell when Graves is creating something for dramatic effect, because this is ultimately a work of historical fiction, and a very influential one, from what I understand. But I can't necessarily piece out the fiction from the fact in a lot of ways, aside from the times where it is quite obvious. And I can maybe just give a few examples of that as this discussion continues. So I only knew that kind of going into it. It was definitely different than I expected. I expected Claudius to be a more central character in this story, but it's not really. This is Claudius writing at a point before he becomes emperor, and he's basically recounting the history of the early Roman Empire, which of course involves family members of his. But he is continuously a side character who gets involved here and there. For most of his life, he's basically, dismissed. He has a couple of brothers who recognize that he is not feeble-minded, because a lot of people assume that he has this limp, he has this stutter, that he's basically dim-witted is what their assumption is, but he's not. He's actually incredibly intelligent. And he is a devout historian as well, which I think plays a pretty thematic role in this. So I expected him to be more of a central role in this, but it's not really. It's him recounting that early empire, things that his grandfather and grandmother and his uncles and cousins and brothers, the things that they're doing, and he just kind of appears here and there. So it can be a lot to keep track of, with all these different names kind of coming up and what's going on with them, the intrigue. So it's not exactly like a straight narrative story. It is like a historical recounting, but from the point of view of somebody who supposedly lived it, or at least vicariously through others, and somebody who would ultimately become important. And given that, once I had to adjust to that, I did end up really enjoying this quite a bit. Even though a lot of it is a recounting of history, we do have some moments where there are some really great points where there's great dialogue. There was one that I really liked. It was when he is younger and he's in a dialogue with some famous Roman historians. There's Livy and, is it Publio? Sorry, I'm blanking on some of the names. There's a lot of names in here. And I finished it last week. But another historian. And they're basically debating, what is the purpose of history? Is it to instruct morally? Or is it to just give the facts as accurately as possible? And we have Claudius basically falling on the latter. And it was a nice, those were fun dialogues. There's a lot of moments where we have great dialogue throughout the book, really sometimes funny dialogue as well, really entertaining moments. And a lot of this is Claudius basically, um, his interest lies in history. And I won't say how the book ends, the last couple lines, but it's pretty funny from a historian's point of view. But we have a lot of rumination and maybe, romanticization about what a historian does and the importance of history. So I really like that stuff. But essentially, we're taken through the reign of Augustus and his wife Livia, who comes off as a major villain in this story, Claudius's grandmother. And I know that back in ancient Rome, she was written about in a negative way. I don't know how much of that we can, is actually true. I haven't looked into that enough. Then we get through Tiberius, we get through Caligula, and all the while we have a lot of side characters as well. I do get the impression through this that Robert Graves is trying to paint Claudius in a way that is very more sympathetic and relatable to people of the early 20th century, of the 1930s. We're led to understand that in no way is Claudius a homosexual or bisexual at all. I think that was to maybe, I don't know if there's any historical connection to that, but I took it as basically Graves trying to make him more relatable and sympathetic again to people of the early 20th century. He is sort of a devout Republican, small r Republican, I don't mean American political party. And there's something about, I haven't read a lot of these, but I've seen a lot of the old sword and sandal movies that take place in ancient Rome. Ben-Hur probably being the most famous example, but not just that. Where people of the early 20th century, especially up through the 1950s and in the 1960s, they would love these epics about ancient Rome, but I feel like they almost loved more seeing the Christian stuff going on in the background, like the biblical things occurring. And we get a little bit of that in here. It's not very big, but there is a certain scene that has to do with a prophecy of a god who will be like, basically a king of kings and being born. And Caligula thinks that the prophecy means him. And they mention, talk of somebody else who's a claimant to that over in the Middle East. So, we see some of the Christian stuff going on in the background, and it doesn't really fit with all this stuff. That's really there for the benefit of the 20th century readers. And also, I feel like we have a great sense of the political maneuverings, or at least the fictionalized version of it, that Robert Graves gives us. And I really like that stuff. We don't always get a clear sense of Roman culture or how exactly their society works, except for some little points here and there. When religion is dealt with, we seem to kind of have more of a Christianized version of religion, of the pagan religion, before Christianity, of course, had really occurred and spread. But it seems to be a little more of a Christianized understanding of that stuff. And that's, it's 1930s. Robert Graves still did a pretty good job of, I think, capturing a voice from ancient Rome, despite those little things that, took me out of it a little bit, but not in any major way. Overall, I did enjoy this. I enjoyed the political intrigues. Like I said, there were some actually really great dramatic moments, and I love a lot of the dialogue, some colorful characters. So overall, I would still definitely recommend it, and I really enjoyed my time reading it. So if you've read it, I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're somebody who maybe is well-versed in this period of Roman history than I am, what you thought about its representation. But that is Robert Graves' I Claudius. I know that there's a sequel, Claudius the God, that I will eventually get to. I'm not eager to run into it right yet. I am hoping that Claudius will be more of a central character in that book, which I don't know how he couldn't be, since he is at that point emperor. That is no spoiler, that is history. So, if you've read that, or if you've read Claudius the God and can let me know what to expect, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, thank you, BookTube.